Greetings again, and welcome to African News Review. I am your host, as usual, Adesoji Iginla, and this is our regular meetup where we talk about the news regarding Africa in the Western press. It would be remiss of me if I don't introduce my brilliant guests, whom I consider my go-to people when it comes to issues on Africa. And so I'll start with the lady. So Aya Fubara Eneli Esquire, author, Your Self-Love Revolution, host Rethinking Freedom, co-host Women and Resistance, and also guest on African News Review. Welcome, sister.
Thank you very much. Greetings.
Yeah, the gentleman needs no introduction. He is a man of many parts, sometime an explorer in Europe, constantly renaming locations in Europe. In fact, if anything, King Charles might just knight him. He is Comrade Milton Allimadi, host Black Star News on WBAI, and author of Manufacturing Hate. And should I also add Adwa? So, welcome, brother.
Thank you, sir. Yeah, we should do an event. I think next April would be the 5th anniversary of my discovery. So I'll come to London and you organize something.
Okay. I'm sure the natives will be waiting. Yes, as it's customary now. So question is, news from where you are. I'll start with sister.
Where do I start? I mean, it's a continuation of some of the things we've discussed with the continued shutdown. I believe today is the 38th day. So if you can imagine,
crazy.
If you can imagine people not getting their paychecks and not knowing when they're coming, the kind of strain that begins to put on people. I know my son is visiting from college this weekend, and he told us it's time to sign up for the next semester and start to pay those fees. So, you know, it's the holiday season. Travel is being affected now. So maybe people are not going home for the holidays. We don't know. We'll see. And all the while, this bozo, this felon in chief, is having fun in the people's house, so to speak. Has unveiled supposedly a reduction in the cost of certain drugs after rolling back what the Biden administration had put in place, which was actually better than what he's negotiated. Except there's this caveat: to get some of the discounts that he's referencing, you have to go through his own website, Trump prescription site. Yes. So he's grifting no matter what. And then locally here in the state of Texas, Gavin Newsom was actually in Houston, Texas yesterday, campaigning. And I believe today, if he hasn't already done so, Hot Wheels, Governor Abbott is going to be announcing his fourth term, his re-election bid for a fourth term, which would make him the longest serving governor in the state of Texas, in the history of the state of Texas. So I guess this notion of leaders, in quotes, wanting to stay on forever is certainly not an African phenomenon. Of course, we saw it with Queen Elizabeth, although you could say her role was more ceremonial. And we can see it with the felon in chief, who is also incidentally trying to get his Department of Justice, it's his, not the country's, his Department of Justice to erase his 34 felonies while we're at it.
Wow.
So there's a lot going on. Yes.
Oh. Comrade.
Okay. So,
I'm sure you can't top that.
To add on to what the sister said, I want our viewers, and generally we need to start teaching people in this country that they should see this not as a Trump issue, but as a class issue. We should see them just like at some point the French people woke up and they started seeing the aristocrat in the 1780s, right? Leading to the French Revolution. The attitude is exactly the same. You know, they're saying let them eat cake, just like the French elite did. It did not end very well for the elite in France, because just think about it. I mean, I don't even know what to say, right? You are cutting SNAP benefits, working people that still need access to assistance in order to be able to buy food, because we have what we call the working poor, in this country. All right.
Yeah.
And that is not a national priority to the ruling class elite. These are definitely the enemy of the majority of the population. So people need to start thinking about there has to be a new class that runs this country that can actually deliver for the people, by the people, for the people.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's what I would like to add to that. And then, of course, in terms of news, we have in New York a candidate that started from 10% and said exactly what needs to be said. He said the problem in New York is that the very rich are too rich and the very impoverished are too poor. And we can't sustain that. And, initially people thought, it's crazy because nobody had ever conducted politics in New York City like that, running for mayor by daring to hurt the feelings of the very rich.
Of the money class.
But he figured he had more people on his side who would support that notion that truth has to be said. And it turns out that he was right. And for his risk and daring to speak the truth, he has now been elected mayor. You saw it was a tough ride. They went to extreme levels of Islamophobia, racism. You have former Governor Cuomo abusing Eric Adams, and Eric Adams, the second African-American mayor of New York City, allowing himself to be abused like a puppet for Cuomo to spew racism and Islamophobia on behalf of Cuomo to provide him with some firewall. It was really disgusting. And I am so happy to see that the citizens of New York City repudiated this kind of hatred and Islamophobia.
But
Thank you.
I know we've got to jump to our stories, but can I just juxtapose what happened in New York with what happened in Minneapolis? So Minneapolis also had a social democrat who was running for mayor, who happens to be a Somalian immigrant in a city with a lot of Somalian citizens.
Immigrants.
Well, let me rephrase. U.S. citizens who are Somalian immigrants, right? So they immigrated here. They now have citizenship, so they can legally vote here. For those of you who need to make this distinction. And he was preaching almost the same thing as Zohran. Now I know everybody brings their own charisma and so on to the table, but he was rejected. He did not win. I think he lost by like 6 percentage votes or whatever to Joshua Frey. And when they talked to some of the Somalians who did not vote for him, it was because he's from a different tribe originally in Somalia than they are. So even though he was speaking the same language, the same, making some of the same promises that took Zohran over the top, in Minneapolis, people who looked like him largely rejected his
message
and his candidacy and chose someone who is visibly white-skinned because he's from the wrong ethnic group.
That was part of the problem. The other part of the problem was that they have like a coalition of these progressive parties that had endorsed him, and they withdrew the endorsement. That is just disgusting. And that, I think, was probably the primary reason, because then the voters that listened to that so-called progressive, entity probably not vote for him after the endorsement was withdrawn. So that is something that also needs to be looked for that. And I'm glad you brought up the issue of the Somali community there. There was a big national scandal, and I'm sorry, I know I'm eating into the times for the program.
No, go on.
I can't let it slide.
We're informing.
It's all Africa. It's all Africa News Review because yes,
thank you.
it is.
Right.
Yeah. Go on.
So there was a national scandal over alleged embezzlement of funds during COVID relief, the pandemic. There's a national food program administered. It's actually financed by the USDA, but in each state they select entities to administer it.
Okay.
In Minneapolis, it was the Department of Education, right? Now, because of their negligence in not properly supervising, there was massive abuse in this program. They worked with two sponsor organizations who then select these vendors and supervise them, right? So, of course, if there's lack of appropriate supervision, people are going to abuse the program. So you had people who allegedly were overbilling for what they claimed they served hungry people during the pandemic. But what happened is they targeted only the Somalis, the vendors, and did not go after the officials at the Minnesota Department of Education, who were completely negligent. And the stories, the newspaper articles, they're all just demonize the Somalis, right? I read them, and I wrote 3 articles that pointed out the role of the Minnesota Department of Education. None of those local papers even covered this up to date. And as a result, many of them have been sentenced to long, in fact, some of them have been sentenced as if they had killed some people, sentences that will not be met to European Americans. So I'm going to go back when I have time on that story. And then I found out the Minnesota Department of Education actually had a conflict of interest because they also retain a percentage of the money from the federal government just to operate that program. So they did not, so supervising was not a priority, right? Because it might have cut down on the funds they're getting for the federal government. Nobody has reported this up to date. Think about that, because all of them are happy. Oh, we got the Somalis. Let them be the fall guy. Disgusting. And in fact, the candidate, that you just mentioned, Fry, I tried to get in touch with him to have him maybe amplify this story as well, but I never heard from him. The truth must be said.
Okay. So, just when you think it can't get any darker, in the UK, the US former British soldier who was accused of raping and killing Miss Wajuru in Kenya in 2012 was arraigned, had an extradition hearing this week at Westminster Magistrate Court. His name was also issued. He goes by the name Robert James Perkis. And because an extradition warrant has come for his arrest and possible extradition, so he's currently contesting that extradition in the UK. But he's been remanded in custody until later in November, when the case will then come up again and obviously judgment. So that said, where do we even begin? Let's go to New York.
New York.
So it's it's no longer news. It's the fact that Uganda, the news comes from The Guardian, and it's that Uganda reacts with joy after Kampala-born Mamdani's victory during a trying time for democracy in East Africa. The headline reads, Uganda view Mamdani's NYC win as a beacon of hope amid democratic struggle. And just a part, Uganda reacted with joy and hope to the news that Kampala-born Zohran Mamdani has been elected mayor of New York City amid a stormy democratic and rights environment in East Africa. Mamdani, who was born in Uganda, 34 years ago, to a family of Indian origin, on Tuesday defeated former Governor Andrew Cuomo and Republican Curtis Silva to become the city's first Muslim mayor, and the first of South Asian heritage. So I suppose the question would be, what would be your take? How do we view this electric victory in light of what is currently going on in East Africa, specifically Tanzania, and looking forward, the election coming up in Uganda? Brother Milton?
Okay. All right. So it's so ironic that so you have a Ugandan-born candidate who wins in a city where nobody is being assaulted when they go to vote. I went and I voted, and I tweeted actually after I voted, and I tagged Museveni, the military dictator, and his son, who's the commander of the army, General Muhoozi. And I said, look at me, I just voted and nobody assaulted me. And I did not see any dead bodies on my way to the polling station either. So the only thing I can say, which is good, is that as a result of this election, as a result of this type of coverage, there's obviously going to be more scrutiny on the elections. And there would have been less scrutiny on the election in Uganda in January had it not been for this kind of historical election event in New York City. And the kind of coverage is going to be generating in the next several weeks leading to that election. Will it make a significant difference to this dictator? I doubt it. I think he will still try to rig the election and see what he can get away with it. Now, will the young people be so emboldened that they won't just go home after a few days and persist in the type of resistance that we've seen in some African countries, including Madagascar, where the youth were out on the streets for 17 days, and on the 18th day, there was the intervention. That's the only unresolved question in Uganda. I believe the regime will probably go ahead with its plan to rig the election, unleash violence, and turn off the internet like they did in Tanzania, and then emerge after 700 bodies, as reportedly killed in Tanzania, and declare herself the victor with 89%. In Uganda, I probably won't declare 89 because in the last election 5 years ago, which
wait a second, is it down to 89? I thought they initially announced 98%.
I think that was probably was it? Wait, I thought it was 89.
No, it was in the 90s. It was in the 90s.
So they're looking for the 2% who didn't vote for her. Right, so in Uganda, after he stole it 5 years ago, I think he awarded Bobby Wine, Robert Kyagulanyi, aka Bobby Wine, of the National Unity Platform, awarded him 35%. So this time they might give him 40 or even 41%, something like that. But I still believe he will award himself the majority of the vote so he can continue as dictator. The day after is the question, of course. Let me just add one thing, because the headline suggested the East African connection, which is true.
Yeah.
As you saw on social media, there was a lot of engagement from young people in Kenya and Uganda. And it continues up to now, denouncing the violence against the youth in Tanzania. I think it was yesterday that 2 Kenyan activists who had come and just observed some of the rallies and election rallies that Bobby Wine's party is holding, they were abducted 5 weeks ago.
Yes.
And the government first denied it. Oh, we don't know where they are. I think they were released either early today or yesterday, and they're back in Kenya now. And the regime has now admitted that, yes, they are what we're going to professional riot instigators. And so that's why we kept them, as the dictator himself. I don't know what he meant by that. He said we kept them in the fridge for the last 5 weeks. And some leaders in Kenya has been calling us, and now we have released them. So that's the context in which that article should also be seen.
Wow. Sister?
Over to you.
So reading this story just evoked a lot of different thoughts and emotions for me. Of course, I'm thinking of Idi Amin. I'm thinking about the, we could say, forced exodus of people who looked like Mamdani.
Correct.
For different reasons, and we can argue whether they were justified or not. I think there are arguments on both sides, and I am not the felon in chief trying to play both sides, but truly. And so it's interesting to me and heartening that perhaps we can get to a place where, as Sylvia Winter would say, we are redefining humanity, and we are just looking at what our needs are and who is prepared to do that work and leverage the levers of power to help the most number of people. So I can see why his election, and Africans for the most part, we've been so derided, and usually the news about us is very negative. I can see why there would be that pride in, oh, wait a second, he was born in Kampala, he's one of us, and now look at what he's doing. I can also see how that can energize the youth who are like, wait a second, he's 34 years old and also has a musical background like Bobby Wine. And look at the election he was able to run and the fact that it was free and fair enough for him to win, right? Thank God the ICE was not employed in New York as they are threatening to employ in California and in some other places. Having said that, I don't know that we pull any major lessons from it. Again, unfortunately, I have to say that I have zero confidence in my elders in Africa. They have definitely let us down as a continent. And so it is going to be up to the youth, and not even my generation, because my generation, we like to wax eloquent, but not do anything else. And if to the extent that Mamdani's win is a topic of conversation that causes people to really start to agitate and to fight for something different, as opposed to this is the status quo, we can't make any changes, or the challenges are too insurmountable because they saw what Zohran was able to, or they have a sense of what Zohran was able to overcome. Hopefully that makes a difference. But having said that, I do want to note, though, that when we look at the election results in Virginia and the exit polls in terms of how Black people voted, for the most part, the Democratic Party, or the candidates that the Democrats put forth, garnered about 90% of the votes from Black voters. It was very interesting to me to look at the exit polls for the mayoral race in New York, and to see that there were still large swaths of Black and Latino people who are at the bottom of the economic rung in New York that still voted against their own interests. That makes no sense to me. Now, forget 50 cents. He's a millionaire. He's doing what he needs to do, protect himself, I suppose. But I lived in New York City. For the vast majority of us who, you might have a room and a bed, but no window to whatever to pour any, as they would say, a pot, and to be able to pour it out of the window. It was really interesting to me that I believe it was something like 52% of Black women who voted for Mamdani.
Yeah.
And the other 48% split their votes, largely gave their vote to Cuomo, but a few people to Silva. And although they were still the highest voting bloc for Mamdani, and for Black men, it was 60%. I would have thought I would have seen numbers similar to those in Virginia. So it'll be interesting to see what extent his Muslim background plays in this, or the fact that he's Indian. I also saw that as soon as he announced his transition team, some people were asking, well, he has no Black person on there. There actually is a Black woman on there as well. But certainly I can see some tensions. We'll see how that works out.
All right.
Okay.
So,
one final question on the Zohran, on the Mamdani victory. Could the way he organized his election be a blueprint for subsequent elections with regards to either Africa or just young people in general, in terms of organization?
Well, before I get to that, there's some interesting points that the sister raised in terms of, things. if this was like 10 years ago, nobody would be able to believe this, or maybe 15. Idi Amin is now in Uganda more popular than Yoweri Museveni. And nobody would believe that. But you do a survey. If you do an informal survey, people will tell you that Idi Amin is less resented, maybe I should put it that way, than Yoweri Museveni, although that's not spoken about. And the interesting thing is that, so this is Zohran Mamdani's father's book, Slow Poison, which just came out. And that's Idi Amin, of course, on the cover. And he speaks about the expulsion of the Indians from Uganda. And he acknowledged the historical role in which the British had inserted the Indians to be sort of like a buffer between them and Africans, and then left the problems for subsequent, the post-colonial governments to handle in Uganda. And he said, yes, he said, but there was a distinction. There was the Indian elite that were very wealthy, and those were the elitist ones that, took advantage of Ugandans. And then you had the working class, but they all became Indians, you see, because nobody has time to distinguish that kind of, nuances, right? And then in terms of Amin was saying, because they don't even intermarry with Africans. And Mamdani said there's actually a different type of explanation. Most of them had arranged marriages, you see. So, they, even within them, the caste system. He said his colleagues in secondary school all had, arranged by their parents types of marriages. But that is not to say that that kind of practice did not reinforce exactly what Amin was also denouncing. So, and I'm just, I just read the chapter actually yesterday. So I found, he addressed some of the issues that you raised. And yes, indeed, they owned all the businesses. And that's why initially, before the economic downturn, of course, when Amin took that action, it was a popular action. And then he blames also the political leadership of the Asians, the Indian community at that time. When Amin started, they didn't take Amin seriously. They thought he was just threatening. So they did not engage him seriously. The British either, because they thought Amin was just, shouting. Just because Amin was their project. And he says, the British thought they knew Amin better because they had helped Amin overthrow his predecessor, Milton Obote. It was Israel and
they had actually recruited Idi Amin. If you go, and Ngugi wa Thiong'o writes about this a little bit. They had recruited and groomed Idi Amin.
Right. Yeah. In fact, there was, he said, in his book, he said the British wanted Obote to have Obote killed as he was coming back to the country from a conference. It was the Israelis who said, no, that might create too much chaos, So have him overthrown while he's out of the country. So sorry to divert and take a lot of time away.
No. I mean, that's part of why we're here. Give history, give news.
I think it's a great conversation because we start in New York, but you see all of these, and we could have continued to weave the web and show all the different trails, which is why so many people are concerned, because those trails can also weave back in terms of empowering people and bringing about change globally.
Yeah. So, from Uganda, we go to Sudan, and the news coming out of the Financial Times is that the Sudanese, so the Financial Times reads, Sudan civil war atrocities cast spotlight on the UAE. Abu Dhabi has repeatedly been accused of arming the RSF paramilitaries behind bloody takeover of El Fasher. The bloody aftermath of the takeover of the city of El Fasher by Sudanese paramilitaries have put a spotlight back on the alleged role of the United Arab Emirates in Sudan, metastasizing civil war. Armed trafficking monitors rights group and Sudan army-backed government has repeatedly accused the UAE of funneling weapons and resources to rapid support forces. So I suppose the question would be, who is the UAE in the grand scheme of things when it comes to African politics? Sister.
Who is the UAE? What comes to mind as I read as I read this article and all the other articles we've read regarding Africa is just like in America, we talked about a post-racial America, and then it's like, oh, okay, that's the past, and now we're moving on to the future and all of that. In Africa, I think we've talked about this Scramble for Africa as though it was something in the past, and now we have our independence, and now, you know, look at what these countries are doing, and they're not taking care of business. I don't believe that the Scramble of Africa ever ended. And UAE is centering themselves in a way that the Arabs had centered themselves in terms of the Arab slave trade, and that many have forgotten to talk about as we focus on the quote unquote Atlantic slave trade. And so I think that the Emirati are doing what their ancestors did. And the question is, what are we going to do as Africans? Because all of these other countries, all of these other people are basically looking out for their own best interest, and quite frankly, to hell with Africa. And so whether in the story that we just covered, whether you're talking about, oh, Israeli calls and says to Britain and Idi Amin, no, don't kill Obote now. You know, there've always been these outside players dictating what happens in our countries. And we see that it's no different here. And by the way, we can talk about what the UAE is doing in this particular instance. And then if we have the conversation about even the unrest in Nigeria and in that whole Sahel region, you're going to have to insert UAE again, or at least acknowledge that they've inserted themselves in that, in creating and funding those conflicts. So the rest of the world, bottom line, benefits when Africa is in chaos. Because if you come into my house and me and my husband and my children are fighting, doors open, windows are open, in the midst of us fighting, you can come in and cart away whatever you want to. Put in a few blows, hide your hand, and I think it's my husband who hit me. I'm going at him. By the way, you're taking whatever you need to out of my house. And that's exactly what's happening in Africa. So I'm not surprised to read this article. My question again is, African leaders, how do we come together, not in a place that is bugged by the Chinese, to have some serious conversations about what we are going to do to protect ourselves? Because if we can't protect ourselves, we don't have stability. If we don't have stability, we cannot have growth, and we cannot then decide what happens to our own resources.
Wow.
Right. All right. So we have to start with the most critical component, which is the state in Africa. And that's part of the main problem. We have many fictitious states, really. So you have, let me use Tanzania as a classic example. You have somebody who inherited the presidency because Magufuli died, right? And she became president. Now she's running on her own terms to be elected as president. What does she do? She locks up the two major opposition candidates, right? And then have 8 minor unknown, I don't know a single name of any one of the 8 people that supposedly ran against her. And maybe she doesn't even know either, right?
Yeah.
And then you have you shut down the internet, social media. You unleash violence. You declare yourself president. And you have the executive chair of the African Union come and congratulate you. And that is it. So this is supposed to be a transition in a state. We can't let so-called states function like that. You know, these are fictitious states. So in Sudan, we have another fictitious state. The state in Sudan is represented by General Burhan, the commander of the army, and it's being contested by General Hemeti, the command of that the death squad that is
Rapid
controlling
support forces.
right the southern and southwestern part of the country. And then in all these other African countries, we have these leaders of fictitious states as well. So they are not going to be offering any solution. In fact, where are they? Why is this being discussed in the United Nations and not the African Union? Why was there a so-called meeting in Washington that did not involve a single African country from Africa south of the Sahara, not involved in that meeting? You know, the countries mentioned were what? Egypt, United Arab Emirates. I don't remember the other countries, but Nigeria was not there. South Africa is not there. Kenya is not there. So the affairs of Africa is being discussed away from Africa without participation of Africans. We are in a very
Just like the Berlin
serious state. In fact, a lot of the conversation we're having now, and that's part of the problem, because there are not many media outlets such as this conversation we're having. Certainly, the ones with the range, like the major ones with the range, will never have this type of conversation. But I'm afraid that we might be in store for more disasters in other African countries. There's no guarantee that Cameroon could not turn into Sudan very quickly. You see, there's no guarantee that Uganda could not turn into Sudan very quickly, depending on what happens in January and going forward. You see? So that's what I'm afraid of, that things could actually get worse in other parts of Africa. But I agree with Sister Solange, 100%. We can no longer try to hide the ethnic racist component of this conflict. Yeah, resource-based, yeah, class-based, yeah, military-based, but at the same time, the racist component of the people who were slaughtered in El Fasher are people that look like, you know, we right now engaged in this conversation. And here's the worst part about it. If the same number of Europeans, let's say there was a European establishment in that part of Sudan, where you have European teachers, European engineers, you have a community of Europeans had been slaughtered like that, other African countries would have intervened by now. And that's the truth of the statement, you know. You know, our own leaders are the enemies because they really don't love Africans either.
No,
and they proved it. Not a few years ago.
There's a deep-rooted self-hatred. I want to pose this question just as it occurred to me. So the United States of America helps to decimate the area known as Gaza. And now, although now it's been quiet, we don't know what's going on. There's still killings happening, but the media suddenly isn't covering it in the same way. But supposedly part of this agreement is there's going to be some sense of America helping to administrate Gaza, whatever that's going to look like, right?
Okay.
And there are certainly people who are welcoming that, including maybe even the Palestinians who have been pummeled for almost 2 years, right? I'm looking at the situation in Nigeria and in all these other African nations, because initially it was, okay, we can go in and take this territory because no one lives there. When that couldn't fly anymore, particularly with the Catholic Church, it was like, oh, they're heathens. Therefore, technically no one lives there. So we can, and there's a Latin term for it and all of that. But now could it be, well, they've clearly demonstrated that they are incapable of ruling. And so we have to intervene. And then you might actually have people who have been so pummeled with poverty and insecurity who are wholeheartedly opening their arms and welcoming their new oppressors as their saviors. Because I certainly see that, you know, in social media, looking to the West, looking to the UN, looking to the UN Security Council. We're going to cover that with another story, to come and save us, but not talking about what we need to do ourselves. Are we not setting ourselves up? Because these guys, similar to how the Civil War never ended in the United States of America, there was always a group that's like, we're getting back, quote unquote, on top. I don't know that these guys, no, let me rephrase. I'm clear that these guys never intended to relinquish power over Africa and its resources.
No,
Okay.
I mean, that's a fact. I mean, imperialism and capitalism thrives on exploitation. So you exploit the weak, particularly the weak that have resources, the ideal. And of course, Nkrumah warned about this. He wrote a whole book, Neocolonialism, the last stage of imperialism. He listed exactly what would happen. And as he's struggling to come out right now and rejoin this struggle, he's just shaking his head and saying, unfortunately, I told you so. He did tell us so, and tell his generation. We engage actually, I think, in the second phase of the independence struggle. The independence struggle resulted in fictitious states who were beholden to the West, beholden to the World Bank, beholden to the IMF. I think the big hiccup was Kenya, when they said, no, why should you prioritize the IMF and World Bank over us, the young Kenyans? And they refused. They killed like 50 plus, but they kept coming back because they knew they would die of hunger anyway.
Yeah.
So the government had to back off there. There's going to be a lot of backing off going forward. I think the nature of the state needs to change in Africa. I'm not saying the only way it can change is what we're seeing in these countries that are under a lot of duress too, because they're trying to make the change. Burkina Faso, Niger, and Mali. But it has to change. It has to have governments that say, and I don't care what form of government it is, our resources belong to us. We are the number one priority. Then let's engage on those terms,
Yeah. There's one thing I like to point out. People like numbers. I was researching the issue of the UAE in Africa. Apparently, the UAE has 97 billion in investment in 2024, 3 times the size of the Chinese investment in the same year. And
in Africa?
In Africa,
around the
yes.
world? Okay,
In Africa,
so
in 20 countries in Africa, 97 billion US dollars. That is mind-boggling. You were saying?
The danger. Countries have more constraints than corporations. So while we keep referring to UAE, that's not a country, that's a corporation. A corporation, they designate who are the officials, the CEO, the board of directors, the chair. That is a corporation. A corporation has no constraints. And it's like having
acting accordingly, yeah.
Absolutely. If having Exxon, okay, Exxon, do whatever you want in Nigeria with no constraints, Plus, we have the advantage over Exxon because they're recognized as a country.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, one final question on this story. Even in the next story we're going into, there's 2 key things. There's a key common denominator with those 2 countries, i.e., let's go to the country. You will see what I'm about to say.
By the way, brother Adesoji, you have a very important question in the chat.
Okay.
People want to know where your glasses came from.
Oh. For all the things.
don't tell me it's from the UAE. Otherwise, I'll just tune out of this.
Okay, so the next story comes from France 24, and it's titled "Jihadist Fuel Blockade Squeezes Mali's Military Leaders." The lead reads, Mali military rulers have been grappling with a weeks-long blockade on fuel import imposed by Al-Qaeda-linked militants. The blockade has plunged the landlocked West African nation into power shortages and deepen the strain on its ruling junta. The landlocked West African nation of Mali is being squeezed by a weeks-long blockade on fuel import imposed by jihadi militants as the insurgent threat grows across the region. The blockade has been a major setback for the Mali military junta in a country that relies on fuel imports from neighboring Senegal and Cote d'Ivoire. Now, this is the part that stands out. Meanwhile, 2 UAE citizens kidnapped by JNIM were released on October 31st. There's a lot of contradictory information about this liberation, said Nasser. At the end of the day, we got to know that it was through merchants and traffickers in Mali that the deal was done, and we know that a bounty of $50 million was paid, and that 20 tons of ammunition will be provided in exchange for the hostages. Can you begin to see the role of the UAE with regards to the African space? When you are giving 50 million, I would love to know who those 2 hostages were for them to have been valued at 50 million.
Why should we believe it's 50 million?
No, I mean, it could be less than that. It could be more than that.
It's more than that, because you need a lot more to do what they're doing in Sudan, and they're going to replicate that model in Mali. So this is what interpretation comes into play. So we are translating this article that you just read to our listeners. It's obvious that they plan to duplicate what they're doing in Sudan. And Mali, it's not by coincidence, has a lot of gold. So it's very clear what they're doing. This so-called hostage, I don't buy that at all. That sounds like a convenient narrative to start sending. You'd send 20 tons of weapons for 2 hostages. What kind of nonsense is that? Think about that. I think the most important thing is that it's very similar to what they're doing in Sudan. That to me is the takeaway from this, what you just read to us.
Okay, sister?
I'm just thinking about what sovereignty means to us. So Mali shares borders with other countries. What are the security forces of these other countries also doing as well? How is it, because this is not the only area where these kind of things are happening, how is it that these planes from external sources can come and drop off whatever it is that they want to? And this is the problem with those countries who have voluntarily allowed foreign nations to have bases on their land, which you basically have no control over. We really need to rethink our whole security situation. So for Senegal, for Niger, if they're looking at this and saying, okay, what are we doing on our end? We understand what the deal is to squeeze the current government in Mali to the point where it collapses. Yep. Of course, what happens is when people are feeling pain, they may not always pay attention to the source of the pain. They're looking at who's in power at the time. And so again, you destabilize and you create enough chaos that people are now embracing their very oppressors. And we cannot, in all of these stories, not also address this issue of, if you want to call it, Islamicizing the area. I mean, that is a recurring theme as well. So we can talk about Christian extremists and nationalists in the United States of America. We can definitely talk about extremists in terms of the Taliban in Afghanistan and places like that. But these people are not intent to just hold power where they are. It's how they want to wield it across the world, even when they're saying they're coming to help. And again, it's like, are these leaders having conversations? How is it that even with the 2 tons of ammunition, that we are not saying, wait a second, where are they operating and how do the two sides, the two countries, our security forces work together to exterminate this threat while it's still small. Listen, I'm a farmer or gardener, whichever one you want to call it. The best time to attack a weed is when it's small, when it's young. You wait until that thing has gotten its tentacles. I mean, there was this one thing, I wasn't sure if it was a weed or a beneficial plant, and so I let it grow. And of course, it grew faster than anything that I'd actually planted in the garden. And by the time I went to get rid of this thing, I'm not exaggerating, I dug 3 feet deep and I still had not gotten to the end of this thing's root. And so African leaders, what we do now as we talk about Africa is the future, and we have the youngest population and so on and so forth. What will that population be used for? Who is going to control them? Who's going to control our resources? We better be having these conversations. And, you know, my part is to sound the alarm in this way. My part is also to educate as many young people as I can here and on the continent. But we are in very, very dangerous times. And the choices we make now are going to reverberate for another half a millennium.
So I posed the question earlier that the preceding story of Sudan and Mali have one thing in common, which is gold. And, you know, if you read the Western press, is the fact that the UAE is almost the center of the gold market for the world. Now, bearing in mind, people are having to lose their lives in light of this, you know, clearly a legitimate activity, but how do you source the gold? Which brings me to the question, do we actually pose the question to our viewers, listeners, that surely, like we had the issue of the blood diamonds, it's now time to start asking the question, where did you get your gold from?
All right, so with gold, it's slightly different because, you know, with diamonds, they really manufacture jewelry. So your participation and engagement at the retail level. With gold, even though some of it goes into product, a lot of it is stored as bullion, you know, in reserves, you see?
Okay.
So our intervention in terms of withdrawing our participation as consumers is a bit limited when it comes to gold. I think in this case, we have to engage UAE much more aggressively. There needs to be coordinated global, and that's where engagement does come into play. If you are a person that's still going to the UAE as a tourist, you can withdraw that. If you're taking any airline associated
boycott
with the UAE, you can boycott that. So we need to start treating the UAE the way apartheid South Africa was being treated, the way apartheid Rhodesia was being treated. So I think, to me, that would be a much more effective engagement that is directed directly against the UAE. Mali has 800 metric tons of gold, about, and that's valued at more than $100 billion. And that's what the UAE is eyeing.
Wow. Talk about a pot of gold.
Yes, sir.
So, sister, final thoughts?
No more thoughts on this one.
Okay. So we continue to watch this space and we go to our final story, which is from The Guardian, and it reads, this is an ongoing one. It reads, UN approved resolution supporting Morocco's claim to Western Sahara. Move is strongest endorsement yet for retained rule over disputed territory, despite fierce opposition from Algeria. The UN Security Council has approved a US-backed resolution supporting Morocco's claim to the disputed Western Sahara, despite fierce opposition from Algeria. Although Friday's vote was divided, the resolution offered the strongest endorsement yet for Morocco's plan to keep sovereignty over the territory, which also has backing from most UN European Union members, and a growing number of African allies. The resolution refers to Morocco's plan as a basis for negotiation, and as with similar resolution in previous years, the text makes no mention of a referendum on self-determination that includes independence as an option, which is a solution long favored by the pro-independence Polisario Front and its ally, including Algeria, Russia, and China. Now, why is Western Sahara key? Western Sahara is a phosphate-rich stretch of coastal desert the size of Colorado that was under Spanish rule until 1975. It is claimed by Morocco and Polisario Front, which operates from refugee camps in southwestern Algeria and claims to represent the Sahrawi people indigenous to the disputed territory. Your thoughts?
You want to go, sister, or should I?
You can go.
All right. So we've discussed the Sahrawi region on a number of episodes.
Yeah.
And I think what seems to be the shift here is that Morocco seems to be in a commanding position at the moment. Morocco feels it has done what Israel did when the Palestinians were driven out, when the state of Israel was created, and the population configuration demographics transformed.
Yeah.
And with the Sahrawi, the referendum was called for in 1990. That is almost 35 years ago.
Years ago, yeah.
So Morocco now thinks it's done in Israel on that part. The population has changed so significantly. And the fact that China and Russia did not veto this resolution. Think about that. And they're supposed to be the ones who support Polisario
self-determination
and self-determination. Yeah. And they did not veto this resolution. This does not augur well for self-determination for the people of Sahrawi. But, sometimes these things are not decided on your behalf. These things are normally decided on the ground anyway. So it's very delusional for Morocco to think that just because they're getting some people on the Security Council to agree with their position, while you have this huge population of Sahrawi exiled right next door, and you think the problem is just going to disappear, you're just fooling yourself. And everybody who is on the Security Council entertaining that notion, they're also fooling themselves. That's what I can say.
Is this the making of another Gaza in Africa? In the sense that, again, we've got this strip. You have settled certain areas and built up this wall, and your people have relocated into that area and so on and so forth. But that doesn't mean that the original inhabitants of that land are just going to all say,
it's okay.
It's okay. We forget. We give up our land, our sovereignty, our rights to govern ourselves. So I guess we shall see how this works out. What comes to mind with all of these stories, and so many that we've covered in the past, and I want to link it even to what's happening here in my neck of the woods as we get ready for primary elections in March, who will determine the candidates on the ballot for the November general election, is that all too often I see people who are being oppressed, who are marginalized, just essentially cannibalizing each other. Just not being able to come together and say, you know what, we might have our differences, but let's focus on what we have in common. Let's understand that if we are divided, we all lose. And so let's come together and see how we can work together to protect ourselves, because in the meantime, there are all of these external forces, which we know for sure do not want us to prosper. And I just see us not being able to have those conversations. And so what I would say to people listening is, it's one thing to talk about these things on an international level, to talk about them on a national level. But I think it behooves us to now bring it closer to home. Like, what are you doing in your own interpersonal relationships? How are you resolving conflicts within maybe even your own home, your own siblings? How are you communicating with people in your community? How are you building in your own community where you are? Because if you have all these concerns about what's happening in Africa or anywhere else, but you're not doing anything in your own community, you are kind of part of the problem too. And as we start building up the know-how and the confidence in resolving issues and disagreements, even at that very basic interpersonal level, then it's going to translate to skill sets that allow us to do the same at more and more, if you will, sophisticated organizational levels. And what I'm seeing in Africa is, and the diaspora as a whole, we have so little confidence in ourselves. We are so easily divided by others who can just come in and share whatever story. You look at the Black Panther Party and what COINTELPRO did, just planting stories of dissension. And because they were not effectively communicating with each other, it just made it so much easier for them to be scattered and to be done away with. And so that is what I would say, is that we can talk about these stories on the national, international level, but each of us also needs to be examining what are we doing as individuals to build where we are and to build up those skill sets and that mindset for the bigger, more macro issues that we all have to deal with.
Yes. That said, I think we have come to the end of this week's episode of African News Review. If this is your first time here, do like, share, and subscribe. The audio version is also available on all podcast platforms. And yes, I must, as always, thank you both for coming through, to sharing your thoughts, your insights into the various stories we have, helping us to understand with historical context why all the story matter. And like someone did ask the question the other day, that actually in the chat, and he said, I am amazed at Black Africans who cry about Palestinians when Black Africans were murdered by jihadists. Point of the Palestinians actually help train most of the freedom fighters during the initial revolutionary movements. They were all based in Algeria. Algeria was a staging post, and even the Black Panthers were there training with the Palestinians. Hence, it was known as Black Algiers. So if you do a bit of search, you will find a book. There's a book out there that covers the entire thing. And so that said, we've come to the end.
To add to that, you should also say the jihadists don't represent all Palestinians or all Arabs. There's some reactionary Africans that certainly don't represent all Africans. In fact, one could even say that maybe almost every single African president right now don't represent Africans as well.
Okay, yeah.
Most of them are reactionary.
True. Yeah. And for the ones that did represent Africa, they were gotten rid of. The name rolls off the tongue, but that's a matter for another day. So, sister, any final thoughts?
Yes. The goal is 2,000 subscribers for this channel by December 31st, 2025. We don't have to wait till December. We can make it happen this month. So please like, please share to all your social media. Share the little shorts as well. Subscribe, hit the notification bell, all those good things. Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay,
I echo those sentiments. Thank you.
Yeah, Brother Milton.
No, I said I echo those same sentiments.
Okay, yes. I would love us to live on the words of Kwame Nkrumah, who said, Africa must unite. We have before us, not only an opportunity, but a historical duty. So if we unite...
Was that Kwame Nkrumah or Kwame Mamdani? Which one? No, just kidding.
Both.
No, it's Kwame Nkrumah who inspired the name Zohran, Kwame Nkrumah. Kwame Mamdani. Yes. Look at me. Thank you very much. And until next week, yes, it's good night and God bless.